Picture the largest flying machine ever built. Not an airplane. Way bigger than an airplane. A rigid airship. An enormous cigar-shaped craft, 245 meters long. That is roughly 3 Boeing 747s placed nose to tail. It has a dining room, a lounge, a smoking room, cabins, a promenade deck where passengers can look out the windows at the clouds below them. It carries up to 72 passengers across the Atlantic Ocean in about 60 hours. For comparison, a ship crossing the Atlantic took about a week. The Hindenburg is a marvel, one of the greatest engineering achievements of the 1930s. It has already made 10 successful round trips across the Atlantic. Its passengers drink champagne, write letters in the lounge, and watch the sun set over the ocean from 200 meters in the air. And on May 6, 1937, as it approaches its mooring station in New Jersey, USA, in front of a crowd of reporters, photographers, and a live radio broadcaster, it catches fire, and 34 seconds later, it is gone. This is the real story of the Hindenburg. And the part most people do not know is not the fire. It is what happened after. Okay, so let me explain what the Hindenburg actually was. Because most people think of it as just a big balloon. It was not just a big balloon. The Hindenburg was the largest aircraft ever flown. Full stop. It was a rigid airship, meaning it had an internal skeleton of aluminum rings and girders covered with cotton fabric. Inside that skeleton were 16 giant gas cells filled with hydrogen. Hydrogen is lighter than air. That is what made it float. The passenger areas were inside the hull itself, not hanging underneath in a gondola like you might imagine. Inside the body of the airship. And the passenger experience was extraordinary for 1937. The dining room had windows, real windows looking out at the clouds. The lounge had a baby grand piano, made of aluminium to save weight. The promenade deck was 50 meters long with slanted windows so passengers could look straight down at the earth far below. Tickets cost about $400 one way in 1937 money. That is roughly $8,000 today. This was luxury air travel before commercial aviation existed. It was owned and operated by Nazi Germany. The swastika was on the tail, which is one reason the Americans were reluctant to sell Germany helium, a safer, non-flammable gas that could have been used instead of hydrogen. And that decision matters later. Here is the thing that becomes very important. The Hindenburg was filled with hydrogen. Hydrogen is extremely flammable, actually more than extremely. Hydrogen ignites at lower concentrations than almost any other gas. It burns fast, it burns hot, and it burns invisibly. Hydrogen flames are almost colorless. The safer option was helium. Also lighter than air, also makes things float, but not flammable at all. There was only one problem. In 1937, almost all of the world's helium came from the United States, and the US government had a law, the Helium Control Act, that banned the export of helium to foreign governments, including Nazi Germany. Germany had asked. The US had said no, so the Hindenburg flew with hydrogen. The designers knew it was dangerous. They designed the ship with extensive fire prevention measures, no open flames anywhere, a smoking room with special airlocks and an electric lighter, because the airlock was supposed to prevent any sparks getting out. The crew were incredibly careful about fire safety, but hydrogen in an enclosed space, with enough of it, in the right conditions, is a risk that cannot be entirely designed away. The designers built the safest hydrogen airship they could. It was still a hydrogen airship. May the 6th, 1937. The Hindenburg has just completed the transatlantic crossing from Frankfurt, Germany, to Lakehurst Naval Air Station in New Jersey. On board are 97 people, 36 passengers, 61 crew. The crossing has taken just over 2.5 days. On the ground at Lakehurst, several hundred people are waiting. Family members, officials, journalists. And here's the thing that makes this disaster different from almost every other disaster in history. There are newsreel cameras. There are press photographers. There is a radio broadcaster named Herbert Morrison, recording a live commentary for WLS Radio in Chicago. Everyone is expecting a routine landing. The Hindenburg had done this dozens of times. Morrison is describing the approach in real time. His voice is warm and professional. He says, Here it comes, ladies and gentlemen, and what a sight it is. A thrilling one. A marvelous sight. The sun is striking the windows of the observation deck on the westward side and sparkling like glittering jewels on the background of black velvet. And then, at 7:25 p.m., something goes wrong. 7:25 p.m. A small flame appears near the tail of the Hindenburg. Herbert Morrison sees it. His voice changes. He says, "It's burst into flames. Get out of the way, get out of the way. It's fire and it's crashing. It's terrible. Oh, the humanity." The Hindenburg falls, nose up at first as the tail burns. Then the nose comes down. The whole thing, 245 meters of aluminium and hydrogen, collapses onto the ground in 34 seconds. 34 seconds. Cameras are rolling from multiple angles. Photographers are shooting. Morrison is still broadcasting. The fire is enormous. The airship is completely consumed. And then something extraordinary happens. People start walking out of the wreckage. And more people. And more. Of the 97 people on board, 62 survived. 2/3, which is not the number most people expect when they hear the Hindenburg disaster. Because the images are so catastrophic, the fireball, the collapsing frame, that it looks unsurvivable. But 62 people walked away. 13 passengers died, 22 crew members died, 1 ground worker died, 36 people total. 36 deaths. In a disaster that looked like it should have killed everyone. So how did 2/3 of the people on board survive? A few reasons. First, the Hindenburg was coming in low to land. It was close to the ground when the fire started. The fall was bad, but it was not from cruise altitude. Second, the Hindenburg burned fast, very fast. Which sounds bad but actually worked in some survivors' favor. The hydrogen burned away so quickly that some people were able to jump and run before the structure fully collapsed. Third, several crew members acted with extraordinary heroism. Steering the collapse, guiding passengers to exits, staying on board to help others escape. One crew member named Werner Franz was 14 years old. He was the cabin boy. When the fire started, a water ballast tank above him burst and soaked him, which protected him from the flames long enough to escape through a hatch. He lived to be 92 years old. A passenger named Margaret Mather survived by lying flat on the floor and covering herself. She described seeing the aluminum framework around her glowing red from the heat and walking out. The stories of survival from the Hindenburg are as remarkable as the disaster itself, and they are almost never told. So, the obvious question, what caused the fire? The honest answer is, we still do not know for certain. Over 80 years of investigation and debate and several competing theories. Theory 1, and the most widely accepted, is a hydrogen leak. During the approach to the mooring tower, the Hindenburg made some late maneuvers to position itself correctly. These maneuvers may have caused a hydrogen gas cell to rupture and leak. The leaking hydrogen would have accumulated in the tail. All it needed was a spark. Theory 2, static electricity. The outer skin of the airship and the internal structure were at different electrical charges, a common condition in thunderstorm conditions, which there had been that day. A discharge of static electricity between the skin and the structure could have ignited the hydrogen. Theory 3, considerably more dramatic, sabotage. A passenger or crew member with anti-Nazi sympathies deliberately caused the fire. This theory has never been proven. What is almost certain is that once the hydrogen ignited, there was nothing to do. Hydrogen fire is fast, it is hot, and in the concentration present in those gas cells. It was over in 34 seconds. Here is what makes the Hindenburg uniquely important in history. It is the first major disaster to be captured simultaneously on film, in photographs, and on live radio. The footage is real. The voice of Herbert Morrison is real. His broadcast was not actually live. It was recorded and played the next day on radio. But his reaction, his voice breaking, his famous line, "Oh, the humanity," that was genuine, unscripted, real-time emotion. And it became the template for disaster reporting. Every news broadcast you have ever seen covering a major event in real time, that emotional, eyewitness, present-tense reporting traces back to Herbert Morrison at Lakehurst on May 6, 1937. The footage of the Hindenburg burning is some of the most replayed footage in history. It ends the age of airships. Commercial passenger airships never fly again after this. Not because airships are technically impossible, but because the image, the fireball, the falling frame, Morrison's voice, is burned into public consciousness so deeply that nobody wants to fly in one anymore. A 34-second fire ends an entire industry. The Hindenburg disaster effectively ended commercial airship travel, which is interesting when you think about it, because in pure numbers, the Hindenburg was not even close to the deadliest aviation disaster in history. 36 people died. By comparison, commercial airline accidents have killed hundreds of people in single incidents. The worst aviation disaster in history killed 583 people. But those accidents, terrible as they were, happened without cameras everywhere, without a live broadcaster, without the footage being replayed endlessly. The Hindenburg disaster happened in front of everyone, and that visibility changed everything. The image of the Hindenburg on fire entered popular culture in a way that statistics never do. Led Zeppelin named themselves after a phrase associated with airships. The image appears on album covers, in films, in advertising. It is one of the most recognizable images of the 20th century. And it represents something specific. The moment the world decided that hydrogen airships were not worth the risk. After the Hindenburg, the Graf Zeppelin, the other great German airship, was immediately retired. The age of the great airships ended on May 6, 1937. In 34 seconds, I want to end with Werner Franz, because I think his story is the most extraordinary thing about the Hindenburg. Werner Franz joined the Hindenburg crew at age 14. He was the cabin boy, the youngest person on board. His job was to carry meals, clean, assist passengers. He was in the lower deck when the fire started. A water ballast tank above him ruptured, poured water over him, soaked him completely. He found a hatch, opened it, jumped to the ground, which was only about 4 meters below by that point as the nose had come down. He ran. He survived. Werner Franz went on to live a long, full life in Germany. He gave interviews about the Hindenburg well into his later years. He was thoughtful, clear-eyed, and slightly bemused by the attention. He died in 2014. He was 92 years old, and until the end of his life, he was the last surviving crew member of the Hindenburg, a 14-year-old boy soaked by an accidental water tank, who ran and lived for 92 years to tell the story. I find that remarkable. Here's what the Hindenburg taught me. Disasters are not just about the disaster. They are about the moment, the context, the visibility. 36 people died in the Hindenburg fire. A tragedy, absolutely. But hundreds of people die in disasters every year that you have never heard of. The Hindenburg is remembered because it happened in front of everyone. Because Herbert Morrison was there with his microphone. Because the cameras were rolling. Because the image entered the world's consciousness in a way that could not be unseen. And because of that visibility, an entire industry changed direction. Safety standards in aviation improved dramatically because of what was learned from the Hindenburg. The image of that fireball pushed engineers and regulators to take fire risk in aircraft more seriously than they ever had. People died, and because of those deaths, and because the world watched, other deaths were prevented. There is a version of progress that looks like that. Terrible, visible public failure that changes how we do things. The Hindenburg was the first disaster the whole world watched, and it changed the world. If incredible true stories like this are your thing, told simply, honestly, the way they deserve to be, you already know what to do.